All right, thank you everyone for attending this Power of Work part 3 on our trial master file quality control training. And this one is going to be an interactive review of how to QC a document and along with some practice. So we want this to be interactive. You can just unmute yourself and shout out the answer, or you can always write it in the chat. But we want you to feel free to participate. All right, so we wanted to do a little review first and kind of also with the big picture of why is this important? So as we mentioned, trial master file is the collection of all the documents in the study, right? And they're critical for being able to have a study get approval. And so as a result, it kind of standardized the process to help reduce confusion and improve the organization by having all the different naming of the clinical documents, right? We talked about earlier this week how important it is to file a document correctly and to name it correctly, because that is how it will be found when trying to have it in an audit or an inspection. And that's kind of the overall purpose, right? The goal is to show that these documents were used during this clinical trial and proving that the trial was well maintained by being able to retrieve the documents in a timely manner, right? So if you can't find the document, then clearly you weren't using the document during the trial, right? Because if you can't find it, then how are you using it to help run the trial? And so that's why it's important to have everything named appropriately and so it's retrievable. And then as a result, it's basically saving lives, right? Sometimes we, your day-to-day job, you don't always feel motivated, people just work to work kind of a thing, but this is a potential to actually have an impact. If you are able to help a rare disease or, a groundbreaking cancer drug get out to patients that really need it, you're helping those patients' lives. And so that's something that I feel very motivated by, and I would like to encourage you guys to think about that bigger purpose of the TMF. So we can improve people's lives with advances of medication and by basically having successful studies because we are able to retrieve these documents and pass inspections. Okay, so this is a quick reminder from the week of kind of some questions to ask yourself when you're looking at a document. We've gone over multiple times the ALCOA-C standards. And then as mentioned, the naming convention is really important. And then you are looking to make sure that the document is complete, and that can be also like as the signatures, if signature missings are, just blank spots where clearly there should be a signature. And then are all the dates correctly in there, and as you're entering in the metadata, you want to make sure that you're following whatever date convention you have for the specific document. And then in the aspect of, the completeness of a document, you want to make sure that all the page numbers are listed correctly. So, we've given the example of if somebody threw something into a scanner and you notice that pages 1, 3, and 5 are there, it's probably because it was a double-sided paper and they didn't really understand that, right? So those are things you want to catch, because if you don't catch it and an inspector does, it definitely shows that the study wasn't being run properly and that document wasn't being really used because somebody should have noticed that earlier. And then number 7 is the document good quality, right? We want to have high quality, very legible documents that, prove that they were being used in the study. This is a quick overview of the ALCOA-C. So we've gone over this multiple times, and so we want to now use this to apply it to some documents. So let's get to it. I figured the first one, we'll start off with a 1572. So we've talked about, does anyone want to chime in on what the 1572 is? I know that we've talked a little bit about it, but if anyone wants to jump in, you're welcome to.
This is a form to submit it to FDA in US indicated the primary investigator, also the sub-investigator, as well as the location of the labs.
Perfect. Yeah, those are the main things you're looking for. As Ken mentioned, the PI, and then the labs, which is very useful, and I will have a follow-up question related to that. And then as you're looking at this document, does anyone see anything that they notice is not good about this document? Would you pass this document?
The signature is missing.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Ken and Melanie. The signature is missing. So that's a big issue. And the 1572 gets updated typically a couple times during the study. Any sort of changes to the site usually gets captured in the 1572, and a new version should be taken care of and created a new one. And so each one needs to be signed. So there should be no reason why a 1572 would not have a signature. Okay, awesome. Okay, then I will pull up another document that we haven't gone over. So I'll give you a little bit of information on this one. This is a CLIA, and it's a very important document. And as Ken mentioned, as you see on the 1572, you'll know the lab information, and so you want to correlate and make sure that you have one for the lab that's listed on the 1572. And sometimes there can be multiple labs, right? We talked about central lab and local labs. So this is really important. Is there anything missing on this document? I know it's blacked out, but there's one thing that's not blacked out.
Effective date.
Yes, the effective date. And then there's also the expiration date to note, right? So you want to know that you're going to be looking for expiration dates to make sure that things are not expired, right? You want to have everything, including medical licenses and your different lab certifications. You want things to be valid and not expired. So unless you have the correct one, right? If you can have multiple of all of them, but you for sure always want to have one valid version. All right. Okay, does anyone, let me see if I can zoom in on this. Does anyone, does anyone know what this document's for? I know we've touched over it very briefly.
Oh, financial.
This is the financial disclosure form, and this is for when somebody who's working on the study is basically declaring that they don't have any sort of financial obligations or investments in the company that's doing the drug, right? So that they won't make tons of money. And so I think it's over publicly traded amount of over 50,000. So you can have some stock, but the idea is if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, then if something, a correct study going well can bring you significant financial gain, right? And you want to avoid that because you don't want somebody who's going to be fudging numbers or doing something weird for their own financial gain. Is there anything on here that you see that is wrong in terms of if you would pass or fail this document?
Missing date.
Yeah, thank you. Good job. There's a missing date. You want to make sure that basically anything is filled. So like if one of these boxes wasn't checked for the line, right? If it's either true or false, if one line was missing or a name was missing, any sort of missing line is something that's really important to capture. Okay. And let's see if this one. This is just a review of a manual. Since it's blacked out, it's kind of, it's just an example document that you would expect in the TMF. I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. I mean, I guess you could feel out this like original version if that was supposed to be a date, but I don't think so. I think it's just a line across. And this is a document that you would expect, but on a different level, not on the site level. So let's kind of stick with site items because that's what we've been looking at. And then one of the things I wanted to go over was a monitoring visit report. Does anyone remember kind of what the monitoring visit report is? And this is the document. I know we briefly went over this, but so the CRA goes out to the site and they are trying to document kind of the status, right? So here we have, and I haven't shown you guys, I've just talked about it. So I thought today would be a good time to kind of go over it. So there is, here's like the recruitment status, right? So it's trying to see how's everything going. And some red flags that you could see, for example, is if you had a whole bunch of like screen fails that were a lot, that can be an issue with a site where maybe they're not fully aware or not, they're basically taking patients and telling them, oh, you should join this study. And then they start to join the study. And then in the process of the screening stage, basically they don't pass because they didn't meet the eligibility requirements. So they're basically putting in people that weren't really eligible to begin with. And a lot of times there can be very obvious things like their age, right? If there's eligibility requirement on the age and they're putting somebody else who's clearly not in that age group, then they make money from that in a sense. That's kind of like a red flag of a site that's maybe just trying to make money, and or a site that is not really understanding the eligibility. So something to watch out for is like a really high number of screen failures. And then also dropouts. Here you do see there's 3 deaths. So that's pretty high. This is an oncology study for a very like deadly disease. So it wasn't abnormal, but usually you wouldn't see this like per one site. That many deaths is a little odd. In this case, it wasn't per the indication, but that's something for you to note. And then dropped, you can even see previous visit, current visit, 4 additional people have dropped out. So that's concerning. I mean, I'm not too sure if it shouldn't be one of the deaths, right? Because there's already 5, but that's just something to watch out for. So I kind of want to just, go through some of the items. Basically, the way the monitoring report is structured is that you have all these different questions, and then the monitor is supposed to give you answers. And so here you can say like, are all the AEs correctly recorded? And they say yes, and that's something to note because for sure they have 3 deaths. So that usually means that there could be AEs, which is serious adverse events related. That's something to watch out for. And then you see the different comments. So it says, are the CRF being done in a timely manner, and say yes, that they're working on it. And then you have different aspects of the monitoring report, and it's just basically a series of questions, right? And why I kind of wanted to go over this is because you can go in and you can just do the bare minimum of just looking for a monitoring report and the additional documents that you would expect to see with a monitoring report, which is the confirmation letter and the follow-up letter, right? That can be, that's totally appropriate for a TMF position to do that, but you can go above and beyond if you have the time permits to actually scan through the monitoring report, and it gives you a lot deeper understanding of what's actually going on in the site, but also just a study overall, and it gives you insight to what there's so many issues, right? So here's the following deviations, right? So saying certain visits not being done, and that's mainly what this is, but and like when it says MM approval, that's usually medical monitor approval. So that means that something, they got approval for this visit not being done, but these other ones were not, right? And so you kind of get an idea of which sites are issue sites, and that's something to really note, because if there's a site that's not doing well, that's usually a site that will be targeted by the FDA as you're doing an inspection, right? And so they'll look at high enrolling sites, and they'll look at if there's any sort of issues. And so specifically for those sites, you should do a lot more effort, right? And so making sure that prior to the closeout visit, like everything's being collected, or everything's up to date. And that's one way that you can kind of go above and beyond. So yeah, did anyone have any questions regarding the monitoring visit report? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to keep scrolling and see if there's anything else, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea. And then sometimes what they'll do is they'll also have the supplies, right? So each site usually gets certain kits from the labs, so they can take the samples, right, and they send it to the lab. And so that's something to note, is that, you know, they might have kits that are going to expire or certain issues. And so just little things to look out for that could potentially provide insight to whether or not a site's having issues. And so yeah, so basically the monitor goes through and tries to make any sort of comments. So here they're saying that the deviations were not reportable to the IRB. And then let's see, so there's no staff changes. And so this is kind of the monitor going through and trying to make sure that everything is ready. So they're saying the investigator study file is up to date. But yeah, basically, this is also a place where sometimes they will say there's issues with what I'm going to come collect, right? So site visit log, but the monitor has to sign the study site visit log, and then they retrieve a copy so that can be filed in the TMF. And then I wanted to give you, let's see. So here's a site visit letter. So this is the confirmation letter. So they're saying, I'm coming out to see you, right? And sometimes they'll say like what kind of issues, or these findings require your attention. So that's usually where I would focus, right? So yeah, so some different things have not been finalized. Okay, and there's issues with IP preparation, right? So investigational products, the drug had issues. Okay, so then this is giving you a deep insight onto like how the site's doing. So he's saying that there's large number of patients that travel. And so they're talking about like reimbursements, right? And so let's say you're somebody who's new to TMF and you're trying to learn clinical research, the monitoring report is a great spot for that. It helps you understand what's happening. So yeah. All right, so I think that gave you a good idea. I know we've talked about the monitoring report, but I wanted to give you a chance to actually see it. Okay, and then let's do a quick look on medical license. And I know we only have a little bit longer and I wanted to have any time for questions, but so this is a medical license. Does anyone know what are some things that we would look for on a medical license?
Make sure the expiration date not over 2 years. Yep.
Yeah. So here it's if this is an old document, right? So it's probably valid on when it was good, but if it says that it expires by a certain date and it's way past that, right? And it's currently ongoing, you'd want to try to collect a new medical license. And I also wanted to show you the other example that I had given you for a medical license. It was, a photocopied version of the medical license, right? They have like a medical license card. So it can look very different, right? Here it's just a printout from the state of Oregon, like kind of like this board that verifies the medical license, right? So if things don't always look exactly how you've seen them in the past, it doesn't exactly mean that it's not valid. You can always check with somebody, but look through first to make sure if it actually makes sense versus if it just doesn't look like what you're familiar with, right? The way a lot of clinical research is done is that there's a lot of variety to different things. And if you worked on an oncology study and then you worked on a different indication, things look different. And that's okay, right? There's not, the way the TMF is, it's not cookie cutter. every single time. There's definitely guidances like the TMF reference model that we can work through and make sure that we know the filing structure, we know what should be in what folder, and then we get an understanding of what to expect that's unique for the study. So yeah, that's just, I wanted to go over some questions and to see if anyone had any questions and to give you guys a little taste of some of the documents.